channel. I'm Angela and this is Lauren. To see why I started this channel and my story, you can check out the link in my description below. My channel is about HFI, Hereditary Fructose Intolerance, and Lauren is going to share her experience with HFI today. I'm going to be asking her some questions and her experience and how this has affected her. Can you tell us about your journey with your child before his diagnosis? What were his first signs that something was wrong?
So my little boy now is 4 years old, and it was rough trying to find his diagnosis at first. I had kind of a weird experience with his pregnancy. I was on bed rest for 7 months due to internal bleeding and a subchorionic hemorrhage. And so his delivery there were like a lot of complications in his delivery. He ended up in the NICU after he was born because his blood sugar was low, actually, and he was so small, so he couldn't keep his body temps up. But once he was able to be regulated because he was on IV fluid, they wanted me to get him on a weight gaining formula. So they didn't want me to nurse because they wanted to know exactly how much he was getting, what he was retaining, that kind of stuff. And that formula, coming to find out, was making him very sick. So he was really about 2 weeks old when he started vomiting very violently. And he couldn't keep anything down. And we tried multiple formulas, but he wasn't gaining weight. He was still just so sick. We had been in and out of the ER, and the doctors that I was working with at the time just kept telling me that he had acid reflux, and there was just a part of me that knew it was not acid reflux.
So I was wondering about the IV. You said they gave him IV. What was in the IV?
In the IVs that he got at first, a lot of it was just D10, so 10% dextrose, 10% water, and in his case, he can have dextrose. Yeah. So when he would get an IV, he actually would do a lot better and what we thought would start to recover. But then the second we would feed him orally with things that contained different types of fructose or sugars, that's when he would crash again.
So what would they feed him other than the formulas? Would they put any other substitute in there, like any other foods?
Not really. We went to the emergency room 3 times before they finally admitted us to admitted us into the hospital as a hospital patient. And they just had him on IV fluid. And then, like I said, every time he would do better with the IV fluid because there wasn't anything extra in the IV fluid, he would do better. So we would try to give him things like Pedialyte, which had sugar in it. We tried to give him things, they called them sweeties. And it's literally just these little capsules of sugar water to, like, if a baby's NPO or like can't eat orally, then it kind of just like helps him take medicine or take the edge off. And so we would do things like that, thinking that we were like comforting him. Yeah. But in turn, it was killing him, making it was so harmful to him, and we had no idea at the time.
So can you talk about the beginning of, let's say, when you first started noticing symptoms with him, and then up to the diagnosis?
I think the thing that we noticed first was obviously his vomiting. Like, he would throw up constantly. We couldn't get anything to stay in that poor little baby's tummy. And so he was losing weight. Obviously, like, it got to the point where it wasn't just like, oh, spit up or even throw up. It was like the pits of his like those coffee grounds and like blood in his throw up. And after the 3rd time we went to the emergency room and they admitted us, they could not figure out why he would be fed by IVs and then be fed orally and then crash again. We just couldn't figure it out. Okay. So they asked if he had been tested for what's called pyloric stenosis. And that's...
Can I hurry and ask a question?
Yeah.
Sorry. So, and the reason why he was not struggling with the IV is because they were using dextrose, right? And then,
yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to clear that up.
Yeah. Okay. So because there was just dextrose in his IV, which he is fine to have. That's why the IVs were fine, but the oral medication and even anything that they were giving him contained sugar.
But no, you didn't know. The doctors didn't know. Nobody had any idea.
No idea.
This was
didn't even like cross anybody's mind.
Yeah.
Once we had been in the hospital for almost a week, the doctors there really kind of were just stumped on why he wasn't getting better. So they asked if he'd been tested for pyloric stenosis, which we had tested him for that. But
what is that exactly?
So pyloric stenosis it's pretty common. Actually, it's a little, from what I understand, it's like a valve that connects to your stomach and it opens and closes as we swallow. And his was basically like overgrown and shut. So on top of his body rejecting the sugar, it physically wasn't being able to take in and process like anything he was swallowing because of the pyloric stenosis.
Okay.
We did have him tested. The tech that tested him, unfortunately, missed the pyloric stenosis. So they took us by ambulance to Primary Children's. They immediately tested us for pyloric stenosis. I think it was through an ultrasound. And they were like, he's got pyloric stenosis. This is a really super simple procedure on a surgical side. Obviously, my husband and I were, stressed. We were freaking out because even this like simple, routine procedure, they just do a little scope to your belly button. They go in with like robotic tools that are so tiny. They just go and snip the muscle, open it. And then once the surgery is done, it's pretty much instant gratification. Like you should be, be able to swallow, hold things down, all that kind of stuff. So I do feel like I should mention this was 2020. So this was COVID. Okay. So hospital restrictions were insane. Awful. And my husband and I could like barely be together. It was very much like one person only, masks, restrictions, like it was like lockdown. So this was in August of 2020 and they took him to do the pyloromyotomy. Surgery went well from what the surgeons could see. He was in and out of surgery in, I feel like, less than an hour. And because of COVID, they were really trying to keep hospital numbers low, trying to get patients in and out. Well, once he was out of surgery and able to eat orally, he was still throwing up.
Yeah.
And I just kept telling the nurse, like, they wanted to send us home. And this was less than 24 hours after his surgery. I mean, it was like, he went into surgery like Tuesday night and we were home Wednesday.
Wow.
So he kept throwing up and I told the nurses I wasn't comfortable going home. And I said, he's still throwing up when he shouldn't be. And she said, well, it's not enough to concern us. And as much as I was concerned, I think they were just trying to do their job, learn their new protocol, all that kind of stuff. So ultimately we were sent home and I remember it was a Thursday and I had been in the hospital it was almost like 10 days at this point. And I went and my mother-in-law was there helping me because I have a 7-year-old also. He was 3 at the time. She came over to help me with the kids. And she told me, she's like, you've been in the hospital, go take a shower, relax, like I have the kids. So I got out of the shower and she was going to take my other little boy on a walk. And I walked out into the bassinet that my baby was in and she had just fed him a bottle and we had been giving him liquid Tylenol, which were both full of sugar.
Yeah.
And it sounded like he was having a hard time breathing. So I picked him up and he projectile vomited and aspirated and stopped breathing. Sorry. And I picked him up and ultimately I didn't know what to do. So I picked him up and I turned him over. And I was just hitting his back as hard as I could with his face down to try to get him to be able to breathe. My mother-in-law had walked back in. And I looked at her and I said, I need you to call 911. I can't get him to breathe. And he was turning blue. And I remember I ran into his room. And miraculously, there was a little bulb sucker on his nightstand. And I sat down, I got down on my knees and I had him in my lap and I had him kind of turned to the side. and I was suctioning his nose and throat as fast as I could. My mother-in-law walked in, handed me the phone that the 911 dispatchers were on, and she wanted me to try to tell her what was happening, to dispatch the team that, the first responders that came. And I just remember her telling me, Lauren, you have to get him to breathe. And in that moment, it was so chaotic, but I was like moving so calmly. And I know that was like Heavenly Father like guiding my hands of what to do. And I would put the bulb sucker as far as I could in the back of his throat, and I could hear a little tiny like gasp of air. And I just kept doing that. And I remember the dispatcher telling me, I need you to tell me when you hear the sirens. And they were so fast. I'm so thankful for those first responders that came. Next thing you know, I had like 12 EMTs, paramedics just bust through my front door. And they came in and they took him from me. They laid him down on the ground and they put a mask on his face that had a hose on it. And they turned this hose on, and I remember his whole body almost like lifted because he was so tiny. And they were able to suction, all the fluid out of his lungs. And that's when we started to see his chest rise and fall again. And they told me that we needed to get in the ambulance and get to the emergency room. And I honestly, the memory's kind of foggy a little bit because there was so much going on. I think I went into shock a little bit, but I remember getting into the back of the ambulance, and I think my mother-in-law called my husband, and then a paramedic told my husband to just meet us at the hospital. And I was like just in a daze. I couldn't believe what was happening, especially because I thought we had been through the worst. And I remember my 3-year-old watching me get into the back of this ambulance with his little brother. And he just asked me where we were going. And I just looked at him and I said, buddy, isn't this so cool? Me and your brother are going to ride in this cool ambulance. And then the paramedic said that we needed to go. So we took off. And I left my 3-year-old and my mother-in-law. And there were fire trucks and rescue trucks and ambulance and neighbors. So many people had come to check on us, but we just left. My husband had met us at the hospital. My parents ended up being at the hospital, and once we got there, the emergency room doctors were on the phone with the surgeons at the other hospital we had been to, and they said, this is really abnormal. We need to get this baby back down. So we were transferred a third time by ambulance back down south, and they had got him back hooked up to IVs, and once he was being fed by IVs, he seemed fine. They watched him for 5 days. Come to find out, because of HFI and it affecting your liver and your blood, he had never stopped bleeding from his first surgery. So he was bleeding internally for 5 days in the hospital, and no one knew. So I remember it was a Sunday. I went to my parents' house who live close to the hospital, went and saw my 3-year-old. My husband and I had to switch because of COVID. So he was at the hospital for a couple hours, watched our baby, and then I went back down and we switched, and I noticed that my son was so pale. And we had a nurse, like the nurse shift switched, and I told the nurse, I said, just so you know, like this color is not normal. This isn't what he, like I just knew. I could tell, you could visibly see, and I knew in my heart something was wrong. So my husband drove. We lived almost 2 hours from the hospital. So he took our toddler. I said, just go home, go sleep in your own bed. It's been chaotic. About 4:00 in the morning, we had a nurse come in to take his vitals, and he was crashing. And they took us to an x-ray room where they did an x-ray, and they saw that there was fluid pooling in his abdomen. They took us to an ultrasound immediately after that. and saw that it was blood in his abdomen. I called my husband immediately. I said, you need to get down here, something's wrong. And when we had come back up from radiology, it was like I'd stepped into like a medical movie, because there were so many doctors, nurses, hospital personnel. The phones were ringing off the hook. People were like yelling stats to each other. And at this point, I didn't really know what was going on or why they, you know what I mean? Everything kind of escalated so quickly. And so I had one of the surgical assistants come to me and say, we need to take your baby to surgery. You need to come with us. And we pushed his bed out into the hallway, and his oxygen crashed. And one of the nurses looked at me and said, grab that corner of his bed and run. And so it was me and a doctor and 2 nurses. We had the corners of his crib, and we were running down the halls of this hospital. And they were trying to get him stable. They knew he needed blood transfusions, but because of COVID and he hadn't had a COVID test, they were fighting us on getting him blood to do these transfusions. And I remember I saw a nurse, I don't know if stole is the right word, but she basically just went and took blood from the trauma unit. And I remember her holding these bags of blood and running past me into the OR. And they came up to me and said, you have to sign all these papers, you have to, like, this is, and I'm like, why are we caring about COVID? Like,
Yeah.
you have to, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like you need to have a different priority right now. And I remember the surgeon came up to me and he grabbed my shoulders and he said, Lauren, I'm going to do everything I can to save him, but I need you to know that I don't know if I can. And I was so angry. I said, don't you dare say that. I said, this is your job. And he just kind of hugged me and he said, I'm going to do everything I can. He goes, I need to take him. And so they took him. And it went from all this chaos to I was standing there by myself in the hall of the hospital. And they had to take him before my husband came. And I felt so alone. A few minutes later, my husband called me and he told me he was there. And I just said they took him. And I had to go and meet my husband out in the parking lot. They wouldn't even let him come in. So my husband was there. His parents came down a little bit later. My parents came down and we just had to sit in the parking lot. And because of that, we didn't want to spend our time outside in the parking lot. We wanted to be, inside. So ultimately, at that point, we didn't care. My husband came in with me. We just were at the surgical waiting room. And they had my baby in surgery for almost 4 hours. We just waited and waited. Finally, I get a phone call from one of the surgical nurses, and she asked where we were. And I just said, we're in the waiting room. And she said, the surgeon's coming to talk to you. And I said, is my baby okay? And she just said, the surgeon's coming to talk to you. We see the surgeon coming down the hall. He pulls us into a private room, closes the door. He can hardly even look at us, and we're just thinking the worst. And he just said, your baby's alive. But we couldn't get the bleeding to stop. We had to open him up. We cut him from hip to hip. And we induced a medical coma. He's on a wound vac. And we need to transport him to the pediatric ICU. And we just couldn't believe what we heard. Like, everything was so confusing. We kept trying to ask why. And nobody really had any answers. And once they moved him got him stable in the ICU, my husband and I could go in one at a time, which was so frustrating. I would go in, he would go in, we'd switch.
Well,
And
it's like, if that was, if that was the last time you, like,
yeah,
oh.
there were so many thoughts that were, even just like in the waiting room, you know what I mean? We couldn't have our family to lean on. We couldn't have any sort of real, like, I guess, physical comfort, you know what I mean, other than each other. So, because he was in the ICU and he was being fed with TPN and lipids, which are basically just IV fluid nutrition, he was doing so much better. He was in the coma for about a week, on a ventilator, and they were able to, about 5 days later, go in, take the wound back out, close his stomach because the bleeding had stopped. A couple days after that, they wanted him to start breathing on his own, so he was taken off the ventilator. Again, still just because of this IV fluid that had no sugar in it. We were in the ICU for about 10 days, and then he was doing so much better. It was like this miracle. The problem is nobody knew what caused this catastrophe.
Yeah.
Nobody knew. So they moved us to a recovery floor, and it was weeks and weeks of like getting better and crashing and getting better and crashing, because every time he would be fed by IVs, which were safe, that had no sugar for him, because they would make the TPN and the lipids every day for him according to his weight, his, you know what I mean? It was specifically made for him. And then he would do better. All of his levels would come up. I mean, his like his hematocrit, his hemoglobin, his PTT, his INR, which count like how fast your blood clot, everything was doing better. And then we would feed him orally. He would throw up and would crash.
Did they notice like a connection, like from the IVs versus when they fed him orally? Did they notice that connection, or
no?
They didn't?
No.
Okay.
Which is one of, like, I think the term practicing medicine is so real, because they really are doing their best, but they truly don't know.
Yeah.
And
they don't know until they know.
And yeah, exactly. So he was also getting blood transfusions because his blood wouldn't clot. So I thought that it had to be the blood that we were giving him.
Okay.
Whatever we were giving him during his transfusions, like maybe it wasn't exactly the right match, or like something. I mean, we were even trying to just get like me and my husband to like donate our blood and then spin it and give it to, I mean, it was just chaos.
So you guys did donate your blood for him and then
try it? We didn't get to that point because they said it was more complicated than just transferring blood for blood, because I guess they have to clean it, spin it, all this kind of stuff. So they were just getting it from the blood bank, but they said that it's a perfect match, it's this. And we would have care conferences, is what they would call them, where they would meet in our room, and it would be the heart doctors, the surgeons, the liver doctors, the kidney doctors, the blood doctors. I mean, everybody would be in there, and I would be there, and they'd argue because nobody knew. Everyone had a piece of it, but nobody knew exactly why it was connecting, or I guess why it wasn't connecting.
So did they notice, because with HFI it affects the liver more than anything, right? So did they talk about that? Did they discuss like something's wrong with the liver, or was it just everything all together?
They did know that his liver was significantly more damaged than any of his other organs, but they were mostly concerned about his blood not clotting.
Okay.
So for this was going on for so long, we finally had met with a geneticist who decided that he wanted to do a full blood panel, me, my husband, and my son. And that took about 6 weeks. And so
was this in Utah that you did that, or did you?
Yeah, it was here in Utah. So they took blood samples for me, my husband, and my little boy, but they tested every single gene. Well, we have tens of thousands of genes. And so for them to sort out which ones were healthy, which ones were mutated, you know what I mean? It took so long. And during that time where they were doing the genetic testing was when he was getting better and crashing and getting better and crashing. And each of his crashes were different too. So that wasn't helping us trying to piece together, what was happening. And I remember, so we got to the hospital in August, and it was now October.
Okay.
So we had been there for a long time, and it was such a roller coaster. And it would on the weekdays, I would stay there. I would just sleep in the hospital. And then my husband would come down on Fridays and we would switch. And I would spend the weekend with my 3-year-old at my parents'. And then he would spend the weekend at the hospital with our baby. And we did that from August to October. And it was so hard because it was just...
I mean, hospital stays are hard.
Yes,
so
easy. Hard and just draining, and you're just on.
And it's kind of like claustrophobic. It's like
it's just such an eerie. You see
reality,
all these other, I think something that was hard for me is, as hard as our situation was, other people were there, but they were getting diagnosed, and we weren't.
Yeah.
And so they were coming and they were leaving, and I just remember feeling like, why can't we leave? Why can't we get a diagnosis? Like, why can't anybody figure out what is wrong? And with that being said, as many complications and as many hard conversations we had to have with certain doctors and hospital personnel, there were those doctors and nurses that became my family. And they were so kind. And they loved my baby as much as I did. And they cared for me and they cared for him, and we would try to have conversations about life and things outside of the hospital, and I'm so forever thankful for them because ultimately they got me through it, because unfortunately I couldn't have my family, I couldn't have my husband, I couldn't have the normal support system that you would in a situation like that. So, yeah. So the first week in October, one of the last weeks we were there, he was not getting better, and they had emergently transferred us back to the pediatric ICU because at that point his liver had failed, his kidneys had failed, he was on cardiac watch, he had no coags, which meant his blood would not clot. They couldn't get IVs to stick because his veins would just collapse. He had double PICC lines in both of his, both under his arms. You would touch him and he would just bruise. He was so sick. So they moved us to the ICU, and I remember a doctor asked me to step out into the hall with him. And he said, I need you to know that a lot of us on the team have kind of reached the end of our road. And we don't know really what to do to move forward. So in that moment, I had felt as though they had given up. And I didn't want to. I never wanted to give up. I never wanted to feel that. So I felt like that gave me more of a drive to fight harder, fight more, whatever that took. And so the next day, where this is a teaching hospital, you have students. We would have a new round of team, like a new team every 2 weeks. And another doctor in the ICU came into our room and said, one of the student doctors has been tested positive for COVID, and we need to move you guys to the COVID unit. And that was my breaking point. Because I said, absolutely not. The only thing this baby wasn't on right now was a ventilator, which he had already been on. And I said, test us for COVID. And they said, well, we can't because it's not been 5 days. I mean, it was in the early stages, so really nobody knew what to do, and it was changing all the time. And
can I ask why you didn't want to move him? Just because it would be hard on him, right?
And because they would move him to the COVID unit to all the other patients that had COVID.
Oh my gosh.
And where he wasn't healthy anyway, there's no way that his immune system would have been able to withstand actually getting COVID.
Yeah, okay.
So that was why I said no.
No, yeah. That makes sense.
And I freaked out. And I just said no. I'm like, if you guys aren't going to help me, I'm going to find somebody who will. Right. I can't believe you guys are giving up. This isn't the end. I was so angry. And I was alone. I didn't have anybody that I could lean on. I didn't know who to call. I didn't want to tell anybody because I didn't want people to think that I, as his mom, had given up. And in the ICU, you have 2 nurses at all times. And they were transfusing and taking his blood every 30 minutes, which was so crazy. And one of the nurses was outside on the computer, and another one was in the room with us and said, they sent his lab tubes to the wrong room. She said, I'll be back in 90 seconds. This other nurse is just right out here if you need her. And I remember I just prayed so earnestly to Heavenly Father about needing to know what to do. And my baby was so sick. And I just begged him that if this was, that he either needed to fix him or bring him home. But just please don't make it be my choice. Just please don't make me decide. And in that moment, I felt that I was going to lose him. But I was at peace because this wasn't a life. You know, this poor baby who was hooked up to so many machines. That's not what you want. But at the same time, I didn't want to feel like I was giving up. And it was such a hard line to draw of, this isn't what a baby deserves, and wanting to keep him here.
It's like you want to keep him here for you.
For me.
But for
yeah.
him.
And in that moment, I remember feeling almost selfish in a sense, because it's like, this isn't, you don't want this for anybody. You don't want this for him. You don't want him in pain.
That's like a lot for someone to go through. And a baby.
Yeah. And I think the timing after that was really, really crazy, because about 2 hours later, I remember 6 or 7 ICU nurses busting through our door, and he had like 6 towers, and they were like taking off all this stuff, and they were like picking up his IVs and yanking them off and slamming these detoxes on his ports, and I had no idea what was going on. And I had the head of the ICU come to me, and she said, I have a diagnosis, but I have a very small window to trust me, and I need you. Or she said, I have a very small window to save him, and I need you to trust me. And I just said, okay.
And this was after you got down and
Yeah.
your prayers.
Like, it felt like minutes after. And I knew that this was, I'm like, okay, this is it. And then all of a sudden his levels started to normalize because they were detoxing him as fast as they could. I mean, the detox was horrible, don't get me wrong, but it was just moments after that or how it felt that he was, you know, starting to get better. And I remember I called my husband and I'm like, you got to get here, because we were 2 hours away.
Yeah.
And they came into my room, and I remember our liver doctor told me, she said, I think you're going to be happy. And I couldn't wrap my head around that anybody would tell me that I would ever be happy. Like, look at our situation.
Yeah.
And so when they told me that he had HFI and it was the hereditary fructose, I remember I was so angry. That's just the truth. I was so angry. I wasn't happy. I was so angry that something so simple almost took my baby from me. And once they got him detoxed, we were in the ICU for 24 hours. And so this was on a Friday. Saturday, they moved us to a recovery. Sunday, they put us in just a normal, regular room. And he went from being hooked up to like 6 towers to just having a pulse ox on his foot. I mean, it was that quick of a turnaround.
Yeah.
After weeks and weeks of torture. And then we were sent home Monday. So we got his diagnosis Friday, and we were sent home Monday morning.
That's crazy.
It was crazy, for sure.
Oh my goodness. So how did his liver levels, did they check them when he left, or did they just...
They, they were checking everything, and it was just so weird. Once all of that sugar was out of his body self-regulated almost, because our bodies are so smart. And even him being so little, it knew once everything was out, he was better. I mean, his hair turned red in the hospital because his liver failed, and that, affects bilirubin and all that kind of stuff. And so we had this little carrot top, baby in the hospital, and his hair started to go back brown. I mean, his skin looked normal. I mean, his eyes looked normal. Like, it was just so crazy physically how it affected him.
It's so crazy
as well.
This little thing is just can make such a difference.
Yeah. It was a wild ride, for sure.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Like, that's so hard.
It's so hard.
Was there ever a time where you would connect the dots with anything they were feeding him? Or was it just you just like, I have no idea? It's like, because it would be hard. You don't know when they're changing the IVs. You don't know when they're feeding him. You're not the one doing his schedule, so you're not going to know those things.
Unfortunately, I never connected the feeding dots either. I just knew after he would be fed through IV and his levels would normalize, we would want to reward him, in a sense, by letting him eat, and he would crash. But typically in the same time period, he would be getting a blood transfusion.
Okay.
And so that was always my hang up. Like, why are we not, looking more into these blood transfusions?
So you noticed a pattern, but it just was...
It was the wrong side of the pattern.
Yeah. When he was first born, did you nurse him at all?
No, I never nursed.
Is it because you didn't want to, or because of the doctors didn't want to?
They told me that if I wanted to nurse, I would need to pump and feed him through a bottle, just because he was so small. Yeah. And at that point, honestly, like, my milk kind of let down, and he was still so little that our biggest concern was he needed to gain weight, and he, needed to get bigger.
What anyone would.
And that was so frustrating for me, because I don't know if it would have made a difference having nursed or not, but like, I was eating what I normally eat, so like, I don't know what that would have done.
I do know that when you're nursing that... I nursed for 9 months. My mom still ate her regular meal, and I was fine. But I do know that it can affect you. Yeah. But I don't think it would obviously wouldn't affect you as much as formula, right?
Yeah, so right.
So it is possible that it could get into the milk, but I know that it also is possible that it's not going to.
Yeah. And I think that was just another frustrating piece of the chaotic puzzle we were trying to put together, is we just couldn't do things normally. You know what I mean? Like, exactly. Nothing was making sense. And at that point, it was just, I guess, honestly, the whole time, I just felt like it was Band-Aids the whole time. Like, this is wrong. Okay, we'll try to stop that. Put a Band-Aid. Yeah. Okay, now this is wrong. So let's put a Band-Aid on it.
Right.
Oh my gosh, now this is wrong. And I felt like it was like this wall of like Band-Aids. And then all of a sudden it just burst. And it was like going to be over.
So you said this started, when did it start?
So he was born in July, and then he was about 2 weeks old when he really started to get sick, and then we were finally admitted to the hospital the first week in August. Okay. And sent home in October.
Okay.
It was a long time.
I bet that felt like a lifetime.
It felt like 10 lifetimes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, it did at some points.
A whole nother world that you just don't ever
want
to go back to.
Yeah, right.
Wow. I do know that the doctors, a lot of them don't even know this exists. Mm-hmm. So
right. It's so rare.
I've talked to them. Sorry.
No, you're fine. And even to get to the point where you do need genetic testing, you have to jump through all kinds of hoops and go through certain, I guess, like, climb the ladder in a sense to get to the point where you're extreme enough as to where they will do a gene panel.
Is there a reason why?
I think just because it takes so long, and it's so, and I think there's very few people who understand it on the geneticist side of it.
I guess it makes sense, because if you are, they test for a lot of things. Right. So it's like, if they were like, hey, they're having these symptoms, they knew about HFI, then they could be like, let's test for this specific gene. But they
You're
didn't know that.
Well, and I think that's what's frustrating is after we found out, they're like, well, if we would have known, we could have taken a blood sample, looked for the gene that he was missing or mutated, and we would have known within probably a day.
Yeah, exactly.
But because there were so many things happening, I just honestly think that they didn't know where to start.
Yeah.
And they just, I'm thankful that they looked at everything, but it's also like frustrating to be like, what, that it took so much to get to, it feels like such a small
Fix.
It feels like such a small thing that could take a life. And I think
crazy.
that's what is so crazy about it, is like, especially on the outside, like, look, people would look at you and be like, there's nothing wrong with you.
Yeah.
This is just Angela. She's just here. And same with my baby. Like, they'd look at him and they're like, nothing is wrong with this boy. And I'm so thankful for that. But that also presents its own set of challenges, because I think people don't take it as serious as it is. And because it's so rare, people don't get it. You know, somebody says, oh, my kid has diabetes, or oh, my kid has celiac, or my kid is, you know, lactose intolerant. Nobody questioned you.
That's, and even with lactose intolerance, right? Is it as, I have no idea about lactose, but is it as severe as this condition?
Right.
I don't know if it is, but I would assume it's not. Because this is something, I mean, right, like you said, he was fighting for his life every single day.
Yes. Well, and just the fact of, like, the knowledge of just our society and communities, like, it is so rare.
Yeah.
So you say, oh, well, my kid has HFI. People look at you and they're like, what does that even mean? And you're like, well, do you have 45 minutes that I can sit here and, like, tell you, you know, like, what he can and can't have? Like, and I think that's been a struggle, too, was people just not understanding what it is. And just to try to explain it, it's like, it's technically not an allergy.
Yeah.
Because it's a disease.
Or an intolerance.
Or
right?
It's
not an intolerance either, but that's what it's called.
But that's what, I'm like, it needs a scarier name. I'm like, HFI is not scary. Call it something scarier. And our hard thing is people will be like, oh, if you can't have sugar, here's an apple. Yeah. Here's a granola bar. And you're like, no, that's just as bad.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's been, you know, frustrating too, to just try to explain it.
Well, we can have some sugars, right? We can have lactose. We can have dextrose. So it's like, it is kind of confusing.
Yes,
so it's
right.
Like when you need 45 minutes to explain, no, there's some sugars we
yes,
can have.
Right.
It's fructose.
People are like, what are you doing? What? It's like, it's a lot. Just trust me. Take my word for it. I promise.
Yeah. You don't need to understand all of it unless you have it.
Yeah, unless you have to, which is hard.
Exactly. I remember I was getting my nails done one time. And my nail tech, he was a guy. He was saying something about me. He's like, "You're so skinny," or whatever, because he knew I had kids, and I was just like, "Yeah, I can't have sugar. I'm allergic." And he's like, "You're such a liar. You're not allergic to sugar." And I'm like, "I really am. I will die."
Because in the simplest form, for people to understand it, you just say, "Oh, he's allergic to it," because that computes in their brain. Yeah. But then it's like, that's such a crazy thing to be allergic to.
It's crazy, yeah.
And then they still don't believe you, and you're like, just listen. Just thank you. Thank you for saying that.
Hopefully after they hear your story, then they will understand. I mean, you know, it'll help them understand more of what it is, and they don't have to.
And even aside from HFI, I think it taught me a lot on just like taking the simple things in life. They're so important.
Yeah.
And just in the other hand, not making, you know, little things a big deal, because I feel like your life can be changed in an instant. And I do remember the first time that we were all four of us home, and I just remember there was nothing happening. You know, we were just watching a movie, and I had both my boys together, and I was so thankful for the simplicity in that. And I think one of the biggest challenges that I ran into was, I think I was naive in the sense of, okay, he has HFI, this is going to be the only problem we ever have to face. Yeah. And that was so wrong.
Yeah.
And
life's like, nope.
Yeah, it was like, no thanks. It was just the beginning of, I mean, it was definitely not as intense and extreme, but it definitely didn't take away the struggles and the challenges that even we're going through now.
Right.
And how it affected our family. I mean, just even like our diet, like in our home, you know, I have a system where I have bins, you know, like if it's in a, like if people come over or babysitters
That's awesome.
or, you know what I mean, whoever, like I have bins in the fridge, I have bins in the freezer, I have bins in the pantry. And if it's from a blue bin, you know, it's
That's
safe,
awesome.
but
That's a really good idea.
it's just, you know what I mean? And then ultimately he feels like he has some choice, you know what I mean? So he'll go to a bin and he'll pick out a snack that he wants and he'll feel like he gets to choose that.
That's awesome.
But it's still, even for, you know, I mean, he's 7 now, but like, you know, he doesn't eat.
He's 7?
Well, Heath is 4, but then my older one, Hayes, is 7. Yeah.
Wow.
And he doesn't, I mean, even just things like fruit.
Yeah.
Like, we don't have fruit in our house.
Yeah.
And, you know, but it's like he still needs, my older boy still needs fruits and veggies to grow and to be strong.
Right.
Like a normal person. But then it's like, how do you balance that? And, okay, well, my little boy can't have this, but like you can, but you don't want to make it a big deal, but you also want people to be aware of it. It's really, I don't know if you feel like that, but I feel like it's a really hard balance.
My mom she was amazing. Like it was kind of more like she would pull things out and make it special for us. So we kind of felt she'd make it more like we're special. We get this theme. Yeah. She would make it amazing for us. So it wasn't, I never felt bad. I actually am glad that I have this. People are like, oh, that's so sad. And I'm just like, I mean, I'm good. Feel bad.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
But I mean, I'm healthy.
For sure.
Can't eat.
Super healthy.
I can't eat sugar.
Yeah. Right. Well, and even like I said, just as our family, like even things, you know, when we go out and say we don't have them with us, it's like, oh, let's get a dessert at the restaurant. Cause like that's things that we don't do. And then we take a bite. We're like, whoa, it's hard. That is thick. Yeah. You know, so like even our bodies to a point, you know, have gotten used to definitely backing off of sugar and trying to take a healthier route and all that kind of stuff. But it's you know this, it's a lot of reading. Yes. It's a lot of labels. It's a lot of disappointment because a nutritional label will be different than the ingredients, which you taught me. Both. And so having to check both is crazy and hard. And people just don't,
I have a video on that now. So it's...
See, look at you. I know. It shouldn't be this complicated because it's just sugar.
Right.
But it turned our world upside down.
Yeah. So I was wondering, this is just something that with your baby, how was he in the hospital? Like, was he, because you've had one before him. Mm-hmm. He must have been a strong baby. He
is so strong. He's our fighter. We joke that he's our Sour Patch Kid. You know, he's either so sweet or you're like, oh, this baby's ready to rock and roll. And he needs that. You know, he needs that personality to be able to, because he's had to fight since the day he was here.
Yeah.
It does present its challenges. We are on his team, but sometimes he, you know what I mean, wants to fight us too. But I'm thankful for his resilience. I'm thankful for his strength, and he really did. I feel like he taught me and just, you know, my individual family so much about, like I said, what's important. Yeah. He was such a happy baby in the hospital, which it just blew our minds.
That's what I was thinking. Like that would be.
Because he was in so much pain. And he would just look at me and just be happy. And it was almost like he was bringing me comfort when I should have been the one to comfort him. But he was always... And I can't even say complained because he couldn't talk, but I know even if he would have talked, he wouldn't have complained. He just was so peaceful. He was such a calm baby. I mean, there were definitely times that were hard. But they would always say how shocked they were about how easy he was to work with and how sweet he was, but how strong he was. And he still is. And I'm so thankful for that.
Yeah, I'm like, I couldn't... Like, having this myself.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine what he felt, you know?
Yeah,
like, I eat a little bit of sugar and it hurts.
Right, it hurts. And I think that was another challenge because he was just a couple weeks old and I was his only advocate. And so I remember there was one night where he would code all the time, every couple days, every week. And
oh my word.
I remember I fell to my knees and I just said, Heavenly Father, I need you to give me the strength to do this. I need you to tell me what is right and what is wrong. I don't have a margin for error because they don't know what they're doing. I don't know what I'm doing. And he can't tell me. And so I know that like It's crazy that we had so many blessings in the worst, absolute worst time of our life.
Yeah.
But there were so many tender mercies and gifts and things that we were given and that we were able to see that I think really changed our perspective just on how we want to live our life and
Right.
the things that we are appreciative for and the things that maybe, you know, shouldn't matter as much that we do, you know what I mean? Things like that. And don't get me wrong, I'm not perfect at it.
No,
I
no,
still, you know what I mean? I still freak
Yeah.
out. I still get nervous. I still get upset about things that I shouldn't, but like it definitely.
But I felt like going through a situation like that could help bring you back to,
For
you know,
sure,
like
for sure.
and bring it back faster. Like, okay, this is like if, let's say I overreact, right? If I'm overreacting, I could imagine like going through something hard, then I'd be like, okay, it's okay.
Right,
Everything's going to be
right.
okay.
And
you
I
know?
think that those aspects are important to our story because I really do think it carried us through the next set of months and weeks and years of challenges that we faced. Like when, I know we had talked about, like when we took him to the special disease clinic in Philadelphia, that was really, really hard to get approval to go to.
Okay, so can you talk a little bit more about that? Because
Yeah.
I'm like, did I hear?
Yeah, I know.
I don't remember.
I think it was just the point where we had kind of felt capped with the doctors here in Utah. Like it was so rare. They really didn't have, you know, they
Yeah.
don't have a ton of diagnosed kids. And
I've had some doctors. So my sister, she had a brand new baby and she wanted to nurse, right? And the doctors wouldn't let her nurse.
yeah,
And she, they started feeding him bananas. And then she was like, my sister has this condition. And I
she
remember.
probably panicked.
Yeah, I remember she gives me a call and she was like, hey, the doctors are calling me liars. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know,
That's
I
literally
know.
what she said.
Right.
She's like, can
Yeah.
you tell them what you have? And I forgot what it's called. So I'm like, oh yeah, this is what it's called. This is what it is. And they're like,
Yeah.
oh, okay. And then
Yeah.
they started to listen
Yep.
to her.
Right.
So.
And I think that what was frustrating is it was so new, it's so uncommon, and I wanted every resource
Right.
that we could possibly have. And if it was flying across the country to go get it, I was going to go get it. And
So what made you decide to go do that?
ultimately just because it was a bigger hospital and the questions that we had and the things
About the condition,
about
right?
the condition of HFI itself just weren't being answered.
Okay.
And that just wasn't good enough for me. I couldn't, I wish
we could have met.
I know,
sooner.
I know,
I'm like,
I know,
would've
yes.
sent me to some doctors that know more about it.
And I think that something that was really hard for me is a lot of that was driven by fear.
I mean,
You know,
come
all
on.
of it.
But I'm saying,
Yeah.
it's your baby.
Right.
You're going
and it
to,
was
like,
so
that's hard.
horrible. And I
Right.
was like, I will not go back to the place that we were. I will
Right.
not go back to a place where it's an option to lose
Okay,
him.
that makes sense.
You know what I
It was
mean?
more like, how can we
Yeah, it was like a
move
preparation.
forward
Yeah.
rather than keep going back?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's like people have like FOMO. I have like fear of not being prepared. You know what I mean? Yeah.
I do too.
Yes.
So-
And I think that was just the biggest drive of like, I don't care where it takes us.
Right.
And we had to have some outsourced help kind of to get us into Philly because our insurance wouldn't cover it. The doctors here fought us on it. They're like, I don't know why they want to go to Philly. And it's like, well, I don't know why you can't
figure this
out. Yeah,
Right.
honestly, to be blunt. And ultimately we did get into the special disease clinic in Philly, and it's kind of twofold because I don't feel like the doctors in Philly really gave us any more information on how to make him better.
Right.
But they did give us a lot of information on things to look for. You know what I mean? Other
Like
things.
if he's sick or
Yeah.
Okay.
mhm. So like they talked to us a lot about like kids with HFI can have vision problems. They
Right.
said that at that point his liver was still damaged and swollen.
Yeah.
And so his liver was actually sticking out from under his ribs. And so they told us he would never play sports. They told us he shouldn't ride a bike or a scooter because if he were to ever have external impact on his liver because of how much stress it had already been in, it would go into permanent failure.
So did they say that, like, from what I know, the liver can heal itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So even if his liver was healed, then they still say he can't play sports, or
Well, at that point it wasn't. It still had
okay, so it was just at
you know what I
that
mean? It
point,
was
okay.
still really swollen,
makes
obviously
sense.
overgrown. And so that was their concern, is it was definitely more of like a conservative, like you don't want him to do any of these things
Yeah.
because if he were to get hurt on the outside,
That makes sense.
it will be you
But
know.
they said for the rest of his life he won't be able to?
Until they were
it's-
able to get
okay.
his liver to
Normalize.
yeah, and not be as swollen, and ultimately like his rib cage cover his liver, which has happened. And that's obviously being, you know, due to being super strict on his diet, watching, you know, doing labs and things like that to make sure that his liver enzymes were normal, to make sure that his blood counts were normal. And so things like that, like I remember, you know, the first time he played on a soccer league, I just was in tears because I never thought, you know, I would see my little boy on a soccer field. I know, when he learned how to ride a bike, you know, we never thought it was safe enough for him to get on a bike. And so it's things like that that you're so appreciative of. But I'm glad that we knew so that we could be cautious in protecting him, but also not restricting him, because you know, you can live a normal life. And I think that was another struggle, is when we got home, I was told to be happy, and I was told to be thankful, and I was told not to be angry, and at least he's alive. People would tell me that, and that honestly just like fueled my anger.
Right.
And it took me a long time. I mean, I've done different types of therapy, which I'm thankful for, but even that, it took me a long time to go talk to somebody because I thought I was fine, because I was told that I needed to be fine. Well, and I wasn't.
Well, it's like everything that we go through, we have to process.
Right.
We have to. And it's not, you're going to have anger if your baby's hurt. That's not
right.
That's not unreasonable, right? It's not unreasonable to be angry that all of this happened and that it was something that was so easy that could be like a little fix that
right.
Obviously it wasn't
a
little process. But of course you're going to be, I would be angry. Like that would be hard.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, like my husband and I, where it was our baby, our story, you know, we went through it together. Our situations were different. I mean, because it was COVID and we couldn't be together, he would go to work.
Yeah, exactly.
What was he going to do? Sit in the parking lot?
Yeah.
So it's like, you're going to have medical bills. We had a toddler. Like, he would go home and work through the week, and I would stay at the hospital, and then we would switch. Like, even though he was so supportive, and obviously he would have been there, you know what I mean, if they would have let him, no doubt. But that was hard too, because like our day-to-day was different. And so my grief was different than his, because when we got home, he was so thankful we were all home and together, and that, you know, he could live with this, and he was going to be okay. And I all of a sudden felt flooded with, what did I just go through?
Exactly.
What just happened?
You're in survival
and
mode.
How am I supposed to go forward? Mm-hmm. And that, it really took me a long time to get out of that fight or flight, you know, because your fight or flight is supposed to be minutes, or, you know what I mean, a short thing. And so when you live in it for months and weeks, it's hard to get out of that mindset.
Even when you are in fight or flight, your emotions are shut off. You're not processing anything.
It's easy to be angry. So that's like the first thing we go to is anger.
Exactly. Like, I mean, obviously anger is always, from what I know, is a cover-up emotion, right? So it's like, obviously you're sad. Yeah. Obviously you're grateful.
It's a protector.
Yeah. But it's like, you can still be grateful and be angry at the same time.
And I think it took me a long time to realize that, because and you know, this is something I learned through going through therapy, like, just because we went through this horrible thing and we had this horrible experience in our life does not mean that we have to have a bad life.
Right.
And that, like, it wasn't a punishment.
Exactly.
You know, like, it wasn't something that I did.
Those comments kind of make you feel like, right?
100%.
Like, it's my fault.
What did I do? Yeah. What should I have done? Yeah. And so to be able to just, like, really reset my thought process, and I mean, it took a long time. You know what I mean? This isn't something that was just like, oh, I'm better. Like, it took a really long time and a lot of hard work and a lot of looking inward that, like, I think the funny thing is like, Heath is good. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, he's figured it out, and he asks questions, and I think I was ashamed of it for a long time, which is something that I had to work on. But, like, to just talk about it and to not make it weird or not make it be shameful was something that, like, he's good. He tells everybody, you know what I mean? And And I'm so thankful that he is that way. And he teaches us all the time he just teaches us lessons every single day that I'm like, how is my 4-year-old teaching me this?
Do that.
You know what I mean? So he's definitely teaches us every day.
Yeah. Just so you know, there's a lot of moms that feel that way, like that it's like kind of embarrassing.
Yeah.
Like something's wrong with my kid. And it's like, I mean, there is something wrong with them, right? We do have a condition, but it also doesn't need to affect us at all.
Yeah.
If you know what to do and how to help it. So.
Well, and I really want this to be, I don't ever want this to be a crutch for him.
Right.
You know, I want him to live life as fully as he can. And so
it's possible.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, I feel like I'm like, I have to be doing something. Like I always have to be. I don't see why he couldn't.
Yeah.
Be or do anything.
And we're starting to see that, but I think when you're not there yet, or that future seems so far away, because for me it's like I don't understand why they can't just create the enzyme, you know what I mean, or like fix the mutation. Like
I do know people are working on that.
When somebody says like, oh, this would be 5 years away, 10 years away, like that feels like 10 lifetimes, but in the medical world, like that's not that long.
Yeah, exactly.
So I do feel like there's hope. I do feel like there's things like that, but like when you're in the trenches, you know what I mean, when you're in the thick of it, it's not always like the most comforting, even though you need to like hang on to it.
And I feel like even coming from never hearing about it, it's a lot different. Because for me, I'm just like, in my day is normal. It doesn't affect me. Even like the way I eat, I eat healthy, like organic. Like you can watch my videos of how I eat. That's how I eat. So it's not.
Well, and you've helped me so much too, and the way that we got connected was like so crazy and random. And because your husband worked with my father-in-law, and they were clear in New Hampshire or something, Connecticut, when they went to dinner, and he's like, yeah, my wife's not here, we can go wherever we want. And it was recent, it was like only a couple months after Heath was home from the hospital.
Really?
Yeah. And so when my in-laws were like,
9 months, that's right.
He was little.
Okay. Yeah.
And they were like, oh, what does your wife have? And even your husband was like, oh, it's this thing, like it's really rare, it's kind of crazy. And when he started talking about it, my in-laws' jaw hit the floor because we had never heard of it ever, let alone know anybody that, has it.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you've helped me so much in not only like, you have options, and I think that was so scary to me. It's like, I have 4 things I can give this kid his whole life. And when we got in contact, you had lists and lists, and I remember reading these lists and bawling because I felt this weight lifted because I wasn't alone. You know what I mean? And that was a trigger for me because I felt like I was alone in the hospital, and I was alone getting his diagnosis, and knowing that there was, even if it was just you in my whole life that I'd ever met that had it, I was so thankful that there was one person that knew it and fully understood it, and that I could honestly lean on. You know what I mean? When I had questions like, I don't think you understand how much that means to me and all the people that you've helped, because I don't think there's anything worse than feeling alone. And so knowing that I always had you as a resource and somebody to talk to, like, really was such a light at the end of our tunnel.
Well,
so thank you for that.
Stop it.
Yes. I know.
I'm like, I'm trying not to cry.
I know. Sorry. We're done with crying. We're done with crying.
It's just, it's hard not to cry about stuff like this. So every time I hear people say, that's so sad that you can't have sweets or whatever, and I'm just like, I feel great. Yeah.
And I think that's huge to build the confidence in your own, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Just as humans, that's how we are. Like, if it's our idea, sweet. And so that's why I really want to give Heath as much choice as he can. And I think the more open we are about it, the more he is about it. And I know there are situations where now he's in preschool and he's, you know what I mean, going to be in grade school. Like, there are still situations like school parties and you know what I mean? Like, my initial reaction is to just pull him out of it. I don't want you to go. I don't want you to know about it, because that's how I want to protect him.
Right.
But in any case, in any sickness or disease or whatever, your kid might have, I feel like especially our case, it almost does him a disservice, because those aren't going to go away. You just have to be in those situations, because if you don't, at least in my case, if I don't go through the situation, I don't know how I'm going to handle it. I get asked all the time, oh, is he ever going to grow out of it? Is he ever? And it's like, No, but they always said, oh, you put this much sugar in a little tiny baby, like it'll, it's detrimental, but this much sugar in a full-size person, like they're healthier, they're stronger, their liver is stronger, you know what I mean? And it wasn't awesome to hear at the time, but now that we're getting there and I'm seeing that, it is a little reassurance, because now I feel like we have like a little bit of job security, you know what I mean? Heaven forbid he did get something that he wasn't supposed to, like his body's smart enough to get it out.
And there are things that you can take to aid in that so that it doesn't hurt his stomach.
Well, and that's what you taught me too. Like I had no idea, you know what I mean? And I think that's the craziest thing is like you go to the doctor for relief, and like every time we have to go, I'm like dreading it, because I'm like, they're asking me, what did you do, or what have you found out? And it's like, what do you mean?
Send me my number.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, listen, I'm not coming here. No, I'm just kidding. But that's what's also so frustrating too, is that they're learning just as quickly or as not quickly as I am.
Right. And I mean, I'm sure if I know there are doctors that are actually diving deep into this condition specifically. But if they were, because they have the knowledge, the medical knowledge, then they could better understand. Probably better than we could. Right. But I mean, with this condition, I feel like somebody that has it would probably understand 100%. More. But
yes, 100%.
I think that the doctors do their best.
I do too. And that's the thing. I'm not trying to say that they weren't working. I mean, I know they were working as hard as they can, and I can't imagine how that would feel being a specialist and being, you know what I mean, through medical school, all that kind of stuff, and not knowing what to do. I mean, I don't have any medical background. I don't even watch Grey's Anatomy. Like, I don't either. You know what I mean? Like, I don't like blood. I don't like anything like that. So the fact that I was thrown into this, like, I'm like, this was a sick joke. Like, that, come on. Like, you know what I mean? I'm like, really? And so
but maybe it took a personality like you for people to take it serious. I mean, even like with your story. Like, I do know it'll help people.
Yeah. And I hope so.
There's people right now that are 50, 60 getting diagnosed. And they never knew they had it. It's crazy. But
well, and I hope too, like, just people, regardless of if it's HFI or another rare genetic disease or whatever it may be, that like just to advocate for yourself and don't be afraid to say, I don't think you're right to a doctor, to a surgeon, to a, you know what I mean, whoever, because I think especially as moms, we're so connected to those babies, and most of the time we're right. And I knew that, and I'm not proud of this, but I would get in fights. Yeah. And we would yell, there was that part of me that was like, you are wrong. I don't know why, and that was so frustrating because I couldn't explain why, but I just knew it. And I think just having that ambition to be like, this isn't going to work. We've tried this before. It's not going to work. And just to stand up for your baby, for yourself, whoever it may be, like, don't back down, because ultimately you know your body, or you know your baby, things like that. And that was so important. It took a little bit for me to be like, okay, I'm just going to... But then it got to the point when it really was a life and death situation where it's like, I don't care about your feelings. I don't care about your ignorance. Like, get off your high horse, come to my level, and help me figure this out, with me. Please.
Like, I appreciate what you do.
Like, we're on the same team. Exactly. So just, you know what I mean? Don't treat me like a number.
So have respect. Like, listen to my opinion as a mother.
A little bit of compassion, because it's not black and white, and it's not... Every case is the same.
And nobody knows everything.
Well, and like, even you and my son it's like a spectrum. You know what I mean? Like, he may be more severe than you, or you know what I mean? But as he gets bigger...
There's so many different strains of HFI that we're finding out that some people could tolerate. But from what I've researched, that actually has to do with the gut and your bacteria, so that you can actually help fix some of those things. Yeah. But obviously you can't, with sugar, right? But after you went home and you got his diagnosis, what things did you have to change in your home with his diet and all that?
At the time, he was little enough that for the three of us, we really didn't have to change immediately. Yeah. Because he was just on formula. Now, they wanted him on a really special formula that was sugar-free, because at that, I mean...
What kind was that? Do you remember?
Yeah, it was called Ellacare. And it was for kids, specifically that have epilepsy, because I guess said that sugar can sometimes trigger seizures in babies. And so where this didn't have any sugar, it was actually made from fish oil protein, I think is what, so it smelled terrible. But we had to get it delivered every 2 weeks through hospice. And it was so expensive and insurance wouldn't cover it. But you just, you know what I mean? You
Crazy.
you just do what you do. And so I think for us where he was almost 5 months old when we got home from the hospital, which is wild. And so we were able to kind of ease into it. And so I bought a kit where you can fill your own pouches with baby food. We pureed a ton. I mean, it was very bland. We just did like oatmeal, but it was basically just like water and oats. You know what I mean? Just we were honestly just trying to get him to gain weight. We did, you told me avocados. And so we were so thankful for avocados and scrambled eggs a lot. Just very bland, very simple. It was a super simple diet. But then as he got bigger, the more we would incorporate into his diet, I think the less we would, the more we would incorporate to his, the more we would cut out for ours. Okay. Just so that it started to feel a little more even.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So you don't want him to feel like he's missing out or anything.
Right. And I feel like meals were honestly easier because you could have a carb, a protein.
Yeah.
And like there are some veggies he can have. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. But also like those are hard on your gut. So then it was like we have to be careful on it gets messy when you get into the nitty-gritty details of it. But meals were easier. But then like, you know what I mean? You just read like there are some normal things he can have, like Cheez-Its.
Yeah.
Those don't have sugar in it. Cheetos don't know, they're probably not the best for you, but they are what that looks to be normal.
Well, it's like, I mean, you compare, for me anyways, I compare my Cheetos to my ice cream, right?
100%.
So it's like,
yes.
They're both probably not the best, but they're fine.
Like they're, at least it's something that feels and
treat.
Looks normal. It's a treat. And even like he can't have, and probably with you too, you can't have the normal goldfish, but he can have the pretzel goldfish because the pretzel goldfish are made with dextrose and the original are made with sucrose. So it's so much reading. It's so much fine print.
They didn't used to have sugar in?
See, and that's what's so crazy.
Is at, like, I've noticed within the last 3 years, there's so many things I'll buy, right? And then they will,
change.
I'm like, oh, it has sugar in it.
Right. Well, and that's the thing, even when we were at the grocery store, we were like, okay, this brand. Yeah. But then it's only like one thing in the brand. It's like, why can't I just be consistent?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
that's been a challenge, but I feel like it's just become just second nature to us. And it's not, and I don't know if that's the right thing to do, but just what we've done is we just try to make everyone eats the same thing, for meals. Snacks are a little bit harder, but like dinners are pretty easy. Breakfast, it's pretty easy now that we, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
No. And it's kind of our joke because I'm definitely like the drive-through mom. Like I'm not like this make it from scratch mom as much as I may look like that.
Until,
And so that's the thing too. It's like, okay, I'm not a good cook. I don't love to do that. I don't know how, I've never made bread. I don't know, you know what I mean? And so it's like, all right, Kay, like, who is this a challenge on, him or me?
Yeah, exactly.
But you know what I mean? Like you just, when you don't have a choice or I think it's about perspective too. Like, don't get me wrong. There are days where I'm like, this is crap. I'm done.
Yeah.
But then there are days where it's like, you just do it.
Did you find any support groups or research or anything like that? Or
before you, no. There was a Facebook group that was called HFI Fructosemia, and I guess it's like a very broad spectrum of what HFI and fructose. I guess fructosemia, from what I understand, is like a very low grade HFI. But it was worldwide. And so there were people in the UK. There were people here. You know what I mean?
I think I'm in that group.
Yeah. And so we couldn't, half the stuff they were talking about, I'm like, I can't get that. I don't know what it is. So ultimately, I feel like it just brought more frustration because I don't feel like I got information that I ultimately wanted to trust because I was so afraid.
That makes sense.
It was like it was me. It was my issue. You know what I mean? Like
No, I understand that. I mean, I wouldn't. I'm like, I'm thinking about things, like it's normal to me, right? So for me, I'm like, I wouldn't even think about that.
Right.
Like I look at something, and I'm like, oh, I can't have that. I already know I can't. So I'm not. But then if I had no idea the condition, it would be hard trying to go through. And if you look in the comments, people are like, yes, you can have it. No, you cannot.
No, you can't. And that's where the spectrum of it comes in, where it's like some people can handle this and some people can't, and doses. And so, and that was just a fear to me. Like if I mess up, I'm going to be right back in the ICU. And that was a big block for me. And I think such like a knee-jerk reaction. Like, I don't want to try anything new. I don't want to do anything new because I am not going back there.
Right.
And it took me a long time to get out of that mindset. But ultimately, like, you're the only person still that I know that has it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And so when
yeah.
you're like, I know people that have this, I was mind blown because I thought we were like one in a gazillion.
You're like, why?
I'm like, what is going on? So it was crazy to me that we even connected.
Yeah, so they were at dinner, and he was talking about, he mentioned to my husband, he said that we finally figured out what was wrong with my grandson, and my husband's like, oh, what was going on? And he started talking to him. He's like, yeah, he can't have sugar. He loves Smarties. And
Yeah.
then
Yes.
my husband's like, wait a minute.
Yeah. Hold on. This
Well,
seems...
he's like, what is it called? He's like, I don't remember what it's called. And my husband's like, is it hereditary fructose intolerance? And he's like, yeah, that's
And
what
that's
it
when
is.
they were like, our jaws hit the floor because we had never heard that term ever.
Yeah.
Let alone,
Yeah,
you know what
exactly.
I mean? And
It's
not a
crazy.
medical situation. So
I do think God brought us together. I really
1000%.
do. Like,
I do not believe in coincidences
Right.
at all. And I'm so thankful for that.
Yeah.
So
I'm like,
truly.
and I know that anyone, like, I have so many people that text me. I know you're worried
Yeah,
about text. I
yes.
could tell that you were
I
kind
know.
of like, I don't want to bother
I
her.
know. I don't.
I'm like, I literally want you to bother me. Like,
That's
and
so sweet of
it
you.
doesn't bother. Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't bother me. I get texts every.
I'm sure you do.
I really
Yeah.
do. So it's not. I keep texting people and giving them all these answers. Why
Yeah.
don't I just put the information out and be like, and
Yeah.
then they can start to feel for it for themselves and figure
Yeah.
out how to do things on
Right.
their own. So
Well,
that
and
they don't feel
even
so
just doing
alone.
this podcast, like this is like the most vulnerable side of me. Your
Yeah.
kids are the most precious thing to you,
Right.
and obviously this experience is the worst experience we've ever been through in our lives.
Yeah.
But it also, I think, brought us so much closer to God too, and
Right.
so to have them at the same time and to put it out there, and it's scary because you want it to be received in the right way,
Right.
you know, because there were mistakes that I had made or things that I had done that I am maybe not proud of.
Guess
but
what? If you ever meet somebody that's never made mistakes, you should
Listen,
have them call me.
totally, I know.
Like, we all make mistakes.
So I
don't
think
worry
that's
about
just
it.
been, like I said, that's just a big lesson to me, like, into just, you never know people's story,
Right.
regardless of how they look on the outside, and you never know what people have been through or are going through, and so to just let them, you don't silver line people as best you can. I think
Exactly.
just as like human nature, we want to offer some sort of comfort, and sometimes I didn't need comfort. Sometimes I just wanted somebody to let it suck with me.
And even listen, right?
And just listen,
well,
you know?
I feel like when you're going through something like that, you just need them to listen.
Yeah.
Like, you're still figuring out how
Yeah.
to process it yourself. You don't need
Yes.
somebody else to tell you how to process it. You'll figure it out.
When you're in the thick of turmoil, the last thing you want to hear is somebody be like, it'll probably be fine.
Yeah.
You're like, but right now I'm not fine.
I'm not okay.
I'm not okay.
And even, like, I don't know anybody that would be going through
Right.
that, like that.
Yeah.
And so I think also one thing that I try to do is I try to stop and think, like, okay, these people clearly have no idea what I've went
Yeah,
through.
right.
They don't understand, and if they
Right.
did, I feel like they would say something different.
Right. 100%.
And so I'm like, I'm not going to take it personal.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that, they hope the best. If you know somebody that's gone through a struggle, I think the best thing that would help is to just listen. They'll figure it out. They will work through their emotions. They'll work through everything. Just be someone that they can listen to. And they'll get through it.
Yeah. I agree.
How is he doing right now?
He's so good.
Okay.
And I'm so thankful for that. We still, like I said, there are still, I call them sub-problems
Right.
of, HFI, and then you have all these little problems, but you just get through them. You know what I mean? You do your best. And like I said, I think building a community would take so much relief, or would give so much relief to moms and people that have it and families, because like I said, being alone, I think, is the worst feeling. And so knowing that you're not alone and that there are people who understand it or have it is so relieving.
Right.
Because then you feel like you have, like I said, like, I haven't found a ton of support groups, but like, I really hope that this becomes one.
Yeah, I do too. Despite all of the challenges, what has been the most rewarding part going through all of this?
I think just having him here, ultimately, because I thought my life was going to change in an instant. I thought I was going to be that mom who went home by herself. And I'm so thankful that I didn't. And I would take these challenges every single day over and over to have him here.
Right.
So like I said, as hard as it's been, we're here. We're a family. We can do, you know, normal things. They may look a little different, or they may take a little more time or a little more preparation, but I'm just so thankful that this is ultimately something that like you can survive,
Right.
you know, and be
and even thrive.
and
right?
thrive.
Be
Yeah.
healthy, happy. Yeah. Is there anything else that you would like to share with anybody listening?
I think just thank you. Thank you for listening to our story and hopefully being understanding of it. And I think the biggest lesson that I've learned is just to have compassion for people. Because like I said, you don't know what people are going through, and never let your anger be bigger than your happiness. Even if you're this angry, have your gratitude just be a little bit bigger, because I think that's when I was really in the depths, is when I let that anger overcome all of my actions, all my thoughts. And that it's okay to be angry, but just don't ever let your anger be bigger than your gratitude, even if they feel like they are. And just, the Lord's there. Christ knows what you've been through.
And he cares.
And he cares.
Right.
And even when you feel like you're alone, you're not.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the biggest thing, is just like, you're never alone. And feel what you want to, like, feel your feelings, as cliche as that sounds. Like, it's important to feel anger just as much as it is to feel happiness.
Yep, it is. Wow.
So thank you.
Thank
you for letting me share in this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for sharing and being vulnerable. And I do know that you'll help a lot of people. And I do know, you know, sometimes we go through hard things, and I think God picks the ones that he knows will do something about it, you know? And so, obviously, that's you.
I hope so.
And so, yeah, I really appreciate you coming.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. Yeah, if you have any questions or anything like that, any videos or anything that you would like me to make, please put it in the comments below. And I will see you guys soon. Thank you.